Unsolved case, 2 missing juveniles, Abigail Joyce Williams.
In the small town of Delphi, Indiana, life took a dark turn on a cold February day in 2017. Liberating German and Abigail Williams, 2 teenage friends, went for a walk on the Monon High Bridge Trail. They never came back.
Tonight we're getting a new view of an unsolved crime 4 years after it shocked the city of Delphi. Police there are still trying to figure out who killed Abby Williams and Libby German.
The search for them quickly grew intense as the community and police scrambled for answers. As days turned into weeks, the case attracted nationwide attention, with every new piece of information adding to the mystery. The case seemed to drag on with no clear answers, until a breakthrough brought Richard Allen into the spotlight.
The man has been accused as Richard Allen. Here he is, shortly after his arrest. He looks a little different these days, but he's getting ready for his trial. And this trial is set to happen in the middle of May. May 13th is the day.
But what exactly did Richard Allen have to do with the case? Let's find out. The Delphi murders occurred on February 13, 2017 in the quiet town of Delphi, Indiana, involving 2 young girls named Abigail Abby Williams, age 13, and Liberty Libby German, aged 14. These best friends, like many others their age, were energetic and curious, with a love for the outdoors. They decided to spend their day off from school hiking along the Monon High Bridge Trail, a popular trail that attracted locals due to its scenic views and historical significance. The trail runs through a heavily wooded area and includes the Monon High Bridge, an old railroad bridge that spans over Deer Creek high above the forest floor. At around 1:35 p.m., Libby's older sister dropped the girls off at the trailhead, with the plan that Libby's father would pick them up later in the afternoon. Excited to explore, the girls started their hike and eventually made their way onto the Monon High Bridge. Libby, who was fond of capturing moments on her cell phone, took several photos as they walked, including a picture of Abby walking along the bridge. This bridge, though a popular spot, was somewhat perilous due to its age and lack of safety railings, making it a site that required careful navigation. As they continued to enjoy their afternoon, the girls encountered a man on the trail. This man was dressed in a dark blue jacket, jeans, and a flat cap. He was walking toward them on the bridge. Sensing something unusual about the situation, Libby began recording on her cell phone, capturing the man as he approached. In this brief video, which would later become a crucial piece of evidence, the man can be heard saying, "Guys, down the hill." This command, though short, was clearly an order directed at the girls, instructing them to leave the bridge and descend into a more isolated area away from the main trail. Following this command, the man led the girls down a steep hill, away from the trail and closer to the creek that flowed beneath the bridge. This area was heavily wooded, with thick underbrush and difficult terrain, making it a secluded spot where the girls would be out of sight from any other hikers who might have been on the trail. The man's intent became terrifyingly clear as he moved them to a place where they were completely vulnerable and far from help. It is believed that the man was armed with a weapon, likely a gun, which he used to control and intimidate the girls. The presence of a weapon would have left the girls with little choice but to comply with his demands, as they were faced with a situation they could never have anticipated. Once he had the girls isolated and under his control, he proceeded to carry out his brutal attack. The details of what happened next remain a mystery, as much of this information has been withheld by law enforcement to protect the integrity of the case. However, what is known is that the girls were subjected to an extremely violent and horrifying ordeal. The exact nature of the injuries they sustained has not been made public, but it's understood that they suffered significant trauma before their lives were tragically cut short. The killer's actions during this period were marked by a level of cruelty and depravity that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. The area where the attack took place is important because of its remoteness. The dense woods and rough terrain made it an ideal location for someone who wanted to commit a crime without being seen or heard. The spot was not easily accessible from the main trail, suggesting that the killer might have had some familiarity with the area or had scouted it beforehand, possibly indicating a level of premeditation in his actions. The bodies of Abby and Libby were discovered the following day, February 14, 2017, in the same wooded area, about half a mile from the Monon High Bridge. Their discovery was the result of an extensive search effort that had been launched after they were reported missing. The sight that met the searchers was horrifying, with the crime scene described as particularly disturbing. Unverified reports suggest that the killer may have staged the bodies in a specific manner, possibly altering their clothing or positioning them in a way that held some significance to him. The details, however, have not been officially confirmed, leaving much about the scene open to speculation. The nature of the crime scene has led to considerable speculation about the killer's motivations and whether there was a ritualistic or symbolic element to the murders. The idea that the killer took the time to stage the bodies or manipulate the scene suggests a level of planning and a desire to leave a particular impression, either for law enforcement or for his own gratification. This aspect of the crime has fueled a great deal of conjecture and has become one of the many haunting elements of this tragic case. The murders of Abby and Libby were not just acts of violence. They were an expression of extreme malice carried out in a calculated manner. The way the killer approached the girls led them away from safety and then attacked them in such a brutal fashion, all point to a person who was methodical and cold-blooded. His ability to maintain control over the situation, to move the girls to a location where they were utterly isolated, and then to try out the murders without being detected, speaks to a level of premeditation that is deeply chilling. The fact that the killer was able to evade capture for so long only adds to the horror of the crime.
They were murdered in Delphi, Indiana, small town. They were just going for a walk. Just going for a walk. Took 5 years for an arrest in the case. And since that arrest, things have gotten much more complicated.
His knowledge of the area, his ability to move undetected, and the sheer brutality of his actions have left an indelible mark on the town of Delphi and on all who have followed the case. The murders of Abby Williams and Liberty German stand as a stark reminder of the potential for evil that exists in the world, and the pain that can be inflicted when that evil is allowed to go unchecked. The investigation into the Delphi murders was massive and involved multiple law enforcement agencies, including the Indiana State Police, the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI. Despite the extensive efforts made by these agencies, the case remained unsolved for several years, with investigators struggling to identify the man seen in the video and heard in the audio clip. In the years that followed, law enforcement released several key pieces of evidence to the public in an attempt to generate leads. This included the grainy image of the man walking on the bridge, which came to be known as the image of Bridge Guy, and a short audio clip of his voice. These pieces of evidence were widely circulated in the media, and the case gained national attention due to the chilling nature of the crime and the mysterious identity of the suspect. Despite receiving thousands of tips from the public and following up on numerous leads, the investigation faced many challenges, and the killer remained at large. As time went on, the investigation into the Delphi murders grew cold. However, law enforcement never gave up on the case, and they continued to work behind the scenes re-examining evidence and exploring new leads as they emerged. The families of Abby and Libby also remained committed to seeking justice for their daughters, holding vigils and working with law enforcement to keep the case in the public eye.
It hurts. We're real people. It's real lives. Some people forget that.
The case was a constant presence in the community of Delphi, with the haunting image of Rich Guy and the chilling audio of his voice serving as a reminder of the unsolved crime. In October 2022, more than 5 years after the murders, a huge breakthrough in the case occurred. On October 28, 2022, law enforcement arrested Richard Allen, a 50-year-old man from Delphi, Indiana, in connection with the murders of Abby and Libby. The arrest came as a shock to many in the community, as Allen had been living in Delphi at the time of the murders and had remained in the area for the years that followed.
I was surprised because he seemed like a real nice guy and everything, waiting on us in the drive-thru and everything.
Allen, who worked at a local CVS pharmacy, had no prior criminal record and was not widely known to law enforcement before his arrest. But investigators had been quietly building a case against him, following up on leads and gathering evidence that ultimately led to his arrest. Richard Allen's arrest was a very important moment in the Delphi murder investigation. On October 28, 2022, law enforcement officers took him into custody at his home in Delphi. This arrest was the result of a culmination of efforts by the Indiana State Police, the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, and the FBI, who had been working tirelessly on the case for over 5 years. The authorities remained tight-lipped about the specific details that led to Allen's arrest, but it was clear that new evidence had come to light that linked him to the crime. This evidence included a combination of witness statements, forensic analysis, and possibly new technological advancements that allowed investigators to make the connection to Allen. After his arrest, Richard Allen was charged with 2 counts of murder and the deaths of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. The charges were filed in Carroll County, and Allen was held without bond pending further legal proceedings. The news of his arrest sent shockwaves through the Delphi community and beyond, as many had feared that the case would never be solved. The fact that the suspect had been living in Delphi all along, working at a local pharmacy and going about his daily life, was both shocking and unsettling for the residents of the small town.
Here comes a guy that has never, ever been announced. He was nobody's radar. It was like, where did this guy come from?
In the days following his arrest, more information about Richard Allen began to emerge. Allen had been a longtime resident of Delphi and had lived in the area for many years. He was married and had a daughter, and by all outward appearances, he had a relatively normal life. However, as investigators delved deeper into his background, they began to uncover connections that linked him to the crime scene. One of the key pieces of evidence that reportedly led to Allen's arrest was a witness statement placing him near the Monon High Bridge at the time of the murders. Additionally, forensic evidence, possibly including DNA, played a crucial role in connecting him to the crime. As the investigation continued, law enforcement also looked into Allen's past to determine if there were any other incidents or behaviors that might suggest a pattern of violence or other criminal activity. This included examining his interactions with others in the community, his work history, and any other evidence that could provide insight into his motives and actions on the day of the murders. The goal was to build a comprehensive case that would stand up in court and ultimately lead to a conviction. The arrest of Richard Allen marked a significant turning point in the Delphi murder investigation, but it was far from the end of the story. Following his arrest, the legal process began, with Allen being formally charged and a series of court proceedings set in motion. The case was expected to be a complex and lengthy one, given the high-profile nature of the crime and the years of investigation that had preceded the arrest. Law enforcement, along with the families of Abby and Libby, hoped that the case would finally bring answers and closure to a community that had been haunted by the murders for so long. In the months that followed Allen's arrest, additional details about the investigation and the evidence against him began to emerge. Court documents revealed that the investigators had collected a substantial amount of evidence linking Allen to the crime scene, including physical evidence, witness statements, and possibly digital evidence such as cell phone data. This evidence was crucial in building a strong case against Allen, and it was expected to play a key role in the trial. The trial process for Richard Allen began with his first court appearances. On October 31, 2022, Allen made his first appearance in court, where he was formally charged with the murders of Abby and Libby.
I think everyone's first reaction was, who? We had no idea who this was.
Richard Allen, you child murderer! Why did you do it? Shame on you!
During this appearance, Allen was informed of the charges against him, and the court set a date for his preliminary hearing. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for November 22, 2022, and it was during this hearing that the court would determine whether there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. As the trial process moved forward, both the prosecution and the defense began to prepare their cases. The prosecution, led by the Carroll County Prosecutor's Office, was tasked with providing beyond a reasonable doubt that Richard Allen was responsible for the murders. This would involve presenting evidence, calling witnesses, and building a narrative that connected Allen to the crime. The prosecution's case was built on a combination of physical evidence, witness testimony, and circumstantial evidence, all of which they believed would prove Allen's guilt. On the other side, the defense, representing Richard Allen, worked to challenge the prosecution's case and cast doubt on the evidence presented.
Whatever is out there is not going to be enough to show that our client did anything.
The defense's strategy involved questioning the reliability of the evidence, pointing out inconsistencies, and raising alternative explanations for the events of February 13, 2017. The defense team also focused on protecting Allen's rights throughout the trial process, ensuring that he received a fair trial and that the legal procedures were followed correctly. One of the key issues in the trial was the admissibility of certain pieces of evidence. The prosecution sought to introduce evidence that they believed linked Allen to the crime, including items found in his possession and statements he had made. The defense, however, challenged the admissibility of this evidence, arguing that it was either obtained improperly or that it was not sufficiently connected to the crime. This led to several pre-trial hearings where the court had to rule on whether certain evidence could be presented to the jury. Another huge aspect of the trial was the selection of the jury. Jury selection is a critical part of any trial, as the jurors are responsible for weighing the evidence and determining the defendant's guilt or innocence. In this case, selecting an impartial jury was particularly challenging due to the high-profile nature of the case and the extensive media coverage it had received. The court took great care in questioning potential jurors to ensure that they could approach the case with an open mind and without preconceived notions about Allen's guilt or innocence. As the trial date approached, there was a great deal of anticipation and tension in the community. The families of Abby and Libby, who had waited years for justice, were closely following the developments, hoping that the trial would finally bring answers and closure. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 8, 2024, with the court setting aside several weeks to hear the case. This was expected to be a lengthy trial, given the complexity of the case and the amount of evidence that would need to be presented. When the trial finally began, the prosecution and defense each made their opening statements, laying out their respective cases. The prosecution's opening statement focused on the evidence they planned to present, which they argued would prove that Richard Allen was the person responsible for the murders. They highlighted the physical evidence, such as items found in Allen's possession, as well as witness testimony that they believe connected Allen to the crime scene. The prosecution also emphasized the importance of the video and audio evidence that had been recovered from Libby German's phone, which they argued placed Allen at the scene of the crime. In contrast, the defense's opening statement sought to challenge the prosecution's case from the outset. The defense argued that the evidence against Allen was circumstantial and that there was no direct proof that he had committed the murders. They pointed to the lack of forensic evidence, such as DNA or fingerprints, that directly linked Allen to the crime scene. The defense also suggested that the investigation had focused too narrowly on Allen, potentially overlooking other suspects or alternative explanations for the crime. As the trial progressed, the court heard testimony from a variety of witnesses. These included law enforcement officers who had been involved in the investigation, forensic experts who analyzed the evidence, and individuals who knew Richard Allen or had information related to the case. The testimony of these witnesses was crucial in helping the jury understand the events leading up to the murders, the investigation that followed, and the evidence that had been collected. Some of the most impactful testimony came from the forensic experts, who explained the significance of the physical evidence and how it had been analyzed. One of the most anticipated moments of the trial was the presentation of the video and audio evidence recovered from Libby German's phone. This evidence had been widely publicized in the years following the murders.
Tonight we're getting a new view of an unsolved crime 4 years after it shocked the city of Delphi. Police there are still trying to figure out who killed Abby Williams and Libby German.
Tonight, as our Rich Van Wyk explains, the girls' families are hoping that there's this new online video that can help lead investigators to their killer.
And was considered a key piece of the prosecution's case. The video showed a man walking on the Monon High Bridge, who the prosecution argued was Richard Allen. The audio clip, in which the man can be heard saying, "Guys, downhill," was also played for the jury. The prosecution contended that it was Allen's voice, given the girls a command that ultimately led to their deaths. The defense, however, sought to discredit this evidence. They argued that the video was grainy and did not clearly show the man's face, making it difficult to definitively identify him as Richard Allen. They also questioned the reliability of the audio clip, suggesting that the voice could belong to someone else and that it was impossible to determine with certainty who was speaking. The defense emphasized that the evidence was not as conclusive as the prosecution claimed and urged the jury to consider the possibility that Allen was not the man in the video. Throughout the trial, the court also heard arguments related to the motive for the crime. The prosecution suggested that Richard Allen had a possible motive for committing the murders, though they acknowledged that the exact reasons for his actions were not fully understood. The defense, on the other hand, argued that there was no clear motive linking Allen to the crime.
When that thing dropped, as a defense attorney, it blew my mind. I had never seen a filing like that.
And that this lack of motive further cast doubt on the prosecution's case. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, both the prosecution and the defense made their closing arguments. The prosecution reiterated their belief that the evidence pointed clearly to Richard Allen as the murderer of Abby Williams and Liberty German. They urged the jury to consider the totality of the evidence, including the video, the audio, the physical items found in Allen's possession, and the testimony of witnesses. The prosecution argued that when all of these pieces were put together, they formed a compelling case that Allen was guilty of the murders. The defense, however, remained steadfast in their argument that the prosecution had not proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. They emphasized the lack of direct evidence linking Allen to the crime and the potential flaws in the investigation. The defense urged the jury to carefully consider the possibility that Allen was innocent and that the real perpetrator was still at large. They argued that the prosecution's case was built on speculation and circumstantial evidence, and that this was not enough to convict someone of such a serious crime. After the closing arguments were made, the jury was tasked with deliberating on the case. This was a critical moment in the trial, as the jury's decision would determine Richard Allen's fate. The jury had to weigh all of the evidence presented during the trial, consider the arguments made by both sides, and reach a verdict based on the standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The trial of Richard Allen for the Delphi murders was a significant event in the ongoing search for justice for Abby Williams and Liberty German. The case had remained unsolved for years, and the trial represented the culmination of a long and difficult journey for the victims' families and the community of Delphi. While the outcome of the trial would not bring the girls back, it was a critical step in the process of holding someone accountable for their deaths and bringing some measure of closure to those who had been affected by this tragic crime. Till today, the deaths of Abigail Abby Williams and Liberty Libby German has had a huge and lasting impact on their families and friends. Abby and Libby were young girls who were full of life and promise. They were only 13 and 14 years old when they tragically lost their lives. Their deaths have affected many people in different ways, and the ripple effects of their loss continue to be felt deeply. For their families, the pain of losing a child is unimaginable. It's a loss that changes their lives forever and leaves them grappling with intense grief. Abby's and Libby's parents were left to cope with the shock and sadness of losing their daughters. The emptiness and sorrow that their families experienced were overwhelming. Every day without Abby and Libby was a reminder of their absence. The families had to adjust to a new reality where their loved ones were no longer there to share their lives. The impact on the families extended beyond just their immediate emotional pain. They had to deal with practical challenges as well. The families were thrust into the public eye as the tragic nature of Abby's and Libby's deaths attracted significant media attention.
Richard Allen's accused of killing Abby Williams and Libby German back in February of 2017. He was back in court in Carroll County today during more compelling testimony. Tonight we're getting a new view of an unsolved crime 4 years after it shocked the city of Delphi.
This sudden spotlight made their grief even more difficult to manage. They had to navigate the complex legal and investigative processes, which added another layer of stress during an already incredibly painful time. The families also had to cope with the emotional toll of public scrutiny and the often intrusive nature of media coverage. The constant attention and speculation made it hard for them to grieve privately and find solace. The friends of Abby and Libby also faced huge emotional impacts. Losing a friend, especially at such a young age, is a deeply traumatic experience. Their friends had to process the shock of the loss while dealing with their own feelings of sadness and confusion. The sense of security that they once felt in their lives was shattered. The friendships that Abby and Libby had formed were disrupted, and their friends had to find ways to cope with the void left by their absence.
I didn't know exactly what all foul play entailed, but when my mom started to tell me someone hurt them and someone wanted them to die, for me it was so difficult to process. News stations started showing up to my house. I couldn't enter my home without someone asking, "What happened? Do you have any information?" And I'm just trying to process the fact that my two best friends were just murdered.
For many, it was challenging to understand why something so tragic happened to people they cared about. The loss also affected their ability to move forward and feel normal again. Many of Abby's and Libby's friends experienced difficulty in their daily lives, such as trouble concentrating at school, increased anxiety, and a sense of loss that lingered for years. The deaths of Abby and Libby also had an impact on local institutions, such as schools and organizations where they were involved. Their schools had to address the emotional needs of students and staff affected by the tragedy. School counselors and psychologists were brought in to help students cope with their feelings and provide support during a difficult time. The schools also had to find ways to honor Abby and Libby's memory, while ensuring that the students had the support they needed to continue their education. It wasn't just their schools. The entire community also paid to tribute the girls in their own way. In the long term, the impact of Abby's and Libby's deaths continued to be felt. Their families and friends had to navigate the ongoing process of grief and healing. They had to find ways to remember Abby and Libby while moving forward with their lives. The process of healing was long and difficult, and it required support from loved ones and the community. Anniversaries and significant dates related to Abby and Libby's lives were especially challenging, as they brought back memories and feelings of loss. The tragedy also led to a heightened awareness of safety and the need for community vigilance. The case prompted discussions about the importance of being aware of one's surroundings and taking steps to ensure the safety of young people. It also brought attention to the need for better resources and support systems for families and communities dealing with similar tragedies. The impact of Abby's and Libby's deaths extended beyond their immediate circles and influenced broader conversations about safety and prevention. So, what do you think about this case? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. See you in the next video, and thanks for watching.